Hello, hello, hello. Yeah? Hello. Welcome, everyone. It is a great pleasure to open this BK talk 1 year later after our first originally BK Feminist Week. This is our second edition. And I'm happy to moderate and to guide you tonight through what I think is a very interesting debate. I think I might not need a lot of presentation of myself, but just in case, I am here working at BK as an assistant professor in the urbanism department, specifically in the urban design section. I could summarize everything like I'm a feminist spatial designer, and I think I'm going to let it be there. I'm also a person who is behind with a lot of other people of this week. The Feminist Week is happening between yesterday and Friday. It's a full program from Monday to Friday on activities with lunches, with spaces for public speaking like this one, but also for spaces to reflect and to work together. And I really invite you to register, but also to look at the program and to see if there is any other event during this week that you want to join. This event is not an event that happens randomly, let's say. It's an event that happens under a lot of support from a lot of people in the background. There is an organizational team, which I would say 80–90% of the people is students and people in very precarious conditions that actually are really supporting this process and making it up. There is a lot of institutional support. We get this space thanks to BK public program like Javier, but we also get spaces in other parts of the institution with food and with drinks and with logistics. And we also have session hosting where we have collaborations with Head New Institute, with the AIR, or many other type of institutes that connect with us and think this is relevant and we should keep doing it. I think before I start the whole process, it's good to know there is another BK Feminist Week coming next year. We already know the dates. And as I say, this is a collaborative process, so you can always join us and curate and organize by yourself this process. This year, it was a bit of a difficult process, and I have to say it because obviously I'm quite pregnant. But talking about Polycrisis. But this year, the topic is very intentional. I think in many ways, we all hold and get pushed and oppressed by many of these crises. And when you see the white lines, it's because while we were collaborating with 20+ people organizing this week, we were realizing how much we intersect with each other. And last year, we also realized feminism is not about just safety for women, or it's not just designing for women. It is about intersecting our struggles. It's about intersecting our conditions. It's about race, it's about class, it's about gender, and it's about how all these things connect together. Yesterday in the kickoff seminar, there was a Mentimeter, a big box actually it's called, which is, we asked, what are your crises? What are your conflicts? And I found it very interesting because when I was doing the slide before, I was trying to be very polite. But when actually the people who join the events talk what they are, is something from the genocide in Palestine or the war in Iran, but also the lack of empathy and also finding a job or housing or mental health. And all these intersect with each other, and all of them are on us. When yesterday we saw major speakers like Lidewijk or Lara Scriven coming back to BK, despite they left, to tell us what do they think about women in Polycrisis, We also started to sit together in the afternoon and think, what is the agency that designers have in this polycrisis? Because we can name them, we can feel them, we can fight them, but what do we do in our practice? What do we do when we design with these polycrises? And then the question is, does design shape our world? I believe it does. I believe we have a lot of agency and we have a lot of implications in what design has to do with this polycrisis. And if it does, it becomes the conversation we have today. So designing by feminist values is a way of interdisciplinary to connect with each other, to understand that everything we do, it has implications in the way we are shaping our world. I want to unpack this like last year I did a bit. Usually in this faculty, from my experience in the last 3, almost getting to the 4th year, we value a lot production. And we think it's the way we teach and the way we actually research very much holds these conditions. And I want to claim, for instance, the yesterday debate on individual authorship. But this hierarchy is not neutral. These things that we value are very much connected to a deeper value system. However, our cities are organized through reproduction. So we sustain life. We are the people, and in this sense I say mostly women, who do the care work, do the domestic labor, do education, maintenance, social cohesion, ecological regeneration. We sustain the life. And in this sense, even beyond genders, the people who do that, how is centralized that in design? How do we design centralizing reproductive social work? I could talk about theory, and I could talk about many of the names that you might have read in your, if you were lucky enough to get a course about a feminist theoretician, or if you were lucky enough to get a tutor who gives you very good references. But I am not that person. I'm a person who is usually on the ground, and I am a person who activates people together. And that's how I can talk about, and that's how I feel I am a feminist. I'm a feminist from lived experience, I'm a feminist from embodied knowledge, and I'm a feminist who acts on what she believes on. And in that sense, for instance, in this faculty, I have been kept encountering these names of people who also do that, and people who also engage with feminism, and people who are also trying to actually pursue this agenda. And there are many more that I hope to get to know more. So those people, I think there is something common we have. We lack naming what we do. We usually do it without discussing it. We usually don't define it. We usually don't give us the space and opportunity to actually connect or to resist and to define the value system that become a school for critical thinking. Because we are not a school for skill development. We should be a school for critical thinking. And in our practice, in a small corner, urbanism and urban design, we are trying to do a bit of it. And we created some spaces for this. And we started to investigate what is a feminist spatial design. What does it mean? How it looks like? And there is the question. And I'm going to go very fast, and it's based on bias of who I know and who I have seen graduated in the last 2 years. But it is intersectional, because it looks plurally. It centers lived experience, because it understands the value of the worth of the people believe needs to be in the city. It makes care visible, because it connects to what are the care systems and how to evolve. It challenges neutrality, because it believes there is a political act on designing. It is rooted in situated knowledge, because it believes that the spaces and the natural system we connect are very much part of our process of designing. A project is feminist when power relations are addressed explicitly and they are not given for granted. Care is structurally centered, so it becomes explicit about it. It changes governance structures because it believes it's important to understand what are the spatial elements for it. It also challenges dominant norms because it constructs a space which challenges what we understand or we standardize as a good design. As I say, last year we had this amazing slide from Els, who she retired and we overlap only for a year. But for me, she was a person who very much brought feminism without talking about it, without naming it. And she very much says something that has kept stuck in my mind for this whole year. And it's school is the place to teach critical thinking. Practice isn't. So if that's the case, and we have to connect with that, the question is not about BK Feminist weeks or events we can produce together, but do we actually treat care as a design problem? Do we teach reproduction as a spatial theory? Do we examine how studio culture mirrors hierarchies? Do we value everyday life space as much as cultural icons? And do we promote collective authorship rather than single icon authorship? Last year, we met to construct a storyline of what BK is and what it could become. And there is a specific post-it there in 2028 that talks about the need to create a space to name feminism as an educational project, as an also research project, and where this faculty takes again back the space that in the 1980s we had to talk about womanhood, womanism, to talk about also feminism, to talk about values, to talk about things that develop critical thinking. So today we have a panel of people who practice feminist values in their everyday, and that I wanted to bring here today to discuss with us. And first, I think we're going to start with Maria. I would like to introduce you, not reading your bio, because I'm now making a habit to not do that. But Maria and I know each other because we started working together in a care project, a careful city project for Rotterdam. And I was amazed how she embodied care and how much beyond what you actually do as research production, you also create a connection, no? And care is not about only the ethics of care in the research or the data management plans, but actually how ethically you work together. And she embodied a person who I think, in my experience, we should bring more back to talk about counter-mapping, about disobedience, and about feminism. So welcome, Maria.
Okay, thank you so much, Irene. Hello, everybody. I would like to thank Irene and Julia for inviting me to be on the panel. My name is Maria. I'm a researcher at the Institute of Housing and Urban Development and an editor for the Contrapunto. When Irene first told me about today, my mind moved in a lot of different directions to see how I could tell a short story about me and my practice in about 10 minutes. And I wrestled with it for a bit until my body made a choice for me. I speak today with an extremely heavy heart on behalf of the many women whose fates are decided through discourses in places like this, but who have no real seat at the table. I would like to speak about imperial feminism. I will try my best to do justice to my central argument, which is the state of liberal feminism is such that it has become the cornerstone of the empire. It cannot help itself from coming into conversation with neoliberalism. It is unable to control the rise of conservatism in its confines. It fails to develop frameworks of protecting the most marginalized in its communities. And so, like any failing movement in the imperial core, it lynches onto the protection of the empire as protection for itself. It then takes the shape of imperial feminism and shakes when in confrontation with militant feminism, working class feminism, Dalit feminism, black feminism, anti-imperial feminism, because they render it useless. However, this is not the first time this happens. Historically, some feminisms have aligned with empire rather than justice, and this is what I will speak about. I would like to start with a little poem. You are all the women who came before you. You with your hunger for love, for light, for learning all the words so you can talk about your famishment. You've been hungry for ages when they invite you to the table. What is this table, you ask? Eyes bigger than your shrunk stomach. What is this table? Littered with bones that the meat has been ripped off from, the knife stained with the satisfaction of fullness. There are no chairs to sit down. You are not here to eat. You stare at yourself in the half-empty glasses, your body in bits all over the table looks back at you. You're all the women who came before you. Whisper all the women who come before you when it is time to eat. You are devoured sinfully at the table. Maria Lugones, in her definition of coloniality of gender, argues that it is the dichotomy of human and the non-human which is central to colonial capitalist modernity. With the violent beginning of the colonization of the Americas and the Caribbean began the era of colonial modernity, where the strictly dichotomous distinction between men and women became the mark of civilization. Indigenous people of the Americas and the enslaved Africans were categorized as not human. And as they are not human, they lack gender. The European man is a man, civilized, fit for rule. The European woman, not the man's complement, but exists to reproduce race and capital, and becomes human in relation to the man. Thus, by consequence of coloniality of gender, colonized woman is an empty category. No women are colonized, no colonized females are women. In a crude extension of the logic behind the term empty category, drawing from my embodied experience, I conclude that liberated Muslim woman remains an empty category. Through the eyes of the oppressor, no Muslim woman is liberated. However, more shockingly so, for the liberators of Muslim women, for the allies to the poor, ghastly, downtrodden Muslim women, no woman that is liberated is Muslim. The solidarity is therefore extended to a piece of fiction. The category of liberated Muslim woman is forced to remain empty in a tug of war between oppressors and liberators as the pillage of the world of the Muslim woman continues. The act of keeping the category empty has historically been a colonial imperative and continues to be central to the politics of the empire and imperialism. In furthering my discussion, I will be zeroing in on the case of the Muslim woman as one of the subjects of the empire. Layla Ahmed, in her book Women and Gender in Islam, makes explicit how the peculiar practices of Islam with respect to women had always formed part of the Western narrative of the quintessential otherness and inferiority of Islam. Historically, Western ideas about Islam amassed from the accounts of travelers and crusaders were vague and often augmented by the lack of understanding Arabic texts. It was in the 18th century that the travelers' interpretation of texts became clearer. The Western observations about Islam started becoming more approximate to the male members' views in these visited societies, since the travelers had limited access to women and their interpretations. Thus, with little to no dialogue with Muslim women, the peculiar view of Islam with respect to its oppression of women has long existed in the European narrative. However, the issue of women took center stage only in the 19th century as women began establishing as Europe began establishing itself as a colonial power in Muslim countries. During colonialism, Britain developed theories of races and social evolution, as per which the middle-class Victorian England was the pinnacle of civilization. The evidence to these theories strongly suggested the biological inferiority of women, which the Victorian establishment found useful to curb the rise of feminism in Britain. Ironically, as the Victorian male establishment contested claims of feminism domestically, They appropriated the language and semantics of feminism in service of colonialism toward men, and other religions and cultures, thus birthing colonial feminism. To that end, British colonial administrator Lord Cromer in British-ruled Egypt provides for a striking example. Cromer, with his decided views on Islam, women in Islam, and the veil, believed that Islamic religion and society was inferior to European ones. He famously wrote that while, open quotes, Christianity teaches respect for women and European men elevate women, Islam degrades them. It was to this degradation most evident in the practice of veiling and segregation that the inferiority of Muslim men could be traced, end quote. He believed it was essential that Egyptians be persuaded or forced into imbibing the true spirit of Western civilization to achieve which it was most important to change the position of women in Islam, especially in relation to veiling. As he wrote and spoke in such contempt of Islam's treatment of Muslim women, all his policies were severely detrimental to Egyptian women. Although it is his convictions at home in Britain that reveal him for what he really was. The champion of the unveiling of Egyptian women was, in England, founding member and sometimes president of the Men's League for opposing women's suffrage. After the pseudo-dissolution of European empires during decolonization in the late 20th century, the imperial core has now expanded and heavily concentrated in the United States of America. The US empire currently sits atop its continued glory of the war on terror, where from the moment the US planned to invade Afghanistan in the aftermath of the 2001 terrorist attacks, freeing Afghan women from Taliban rule and the burqa became the loudest legitimation for the US-led violent military intervention. The devastating structures and effects of this murderous gift of freedom still plague the people of Afghanistan, especially its women. First Lady Laura Bush's radio address on November 17, 2001, marked the beginning of the era of imperial feminism as we know it today, when she declared, open quote, "Because of our recent military gains in much of Afghanistan, women are no longer imprisoned in their homes. They can listen to music and teach their daughters without fear of punishment. The fight against terrorism is also a fight for the rights and dignity of women," end quote. Today, imperial feminism is the greatest arm of colonial violence worldwide. The demonization of Palestinian men by the settler colonial state and its simultaneous rhetoric of wanting to save Palestinian women and queer people is the continuation of the civilizational project led by Europe. European colonial empires vouching to bring enlightenment to the dirty, dingy third world, and in pursuit of it, pillaging everything for its own continued existence, holds a horrifying candle to the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the broader settler colonial occupation of Palestine. Settler colonialism is sustained by the deployment of colonial feminism and emboldened by US imperial feminism. The US presidential election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, which the world is still left with making sense of, was on Harris's seemingly progressive front, fought on the platform of her identity as the highest-ranking African American and Asian American official in US history. While Kamala had a big support base of liberal feminists in the United States, she was actively challenged by critical feminist groups on account of her involvement in the incarceration of marginalized groups in the US and her complicity in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. In legitimization of oppression of other women, imperial feminism looks at the Native American, African American, Indigenous, Black, and Muslim women as the racialized other in need of being saved. Here, the white women and other women in service of the empire look at the liberated Muslim woman as an empty category, meaning that no Muslim woman is liberated and that liberated women cease to be Muslim because they become incorporated into the fold of whiteness and modernity. So finally, what has this meant for me? What has this meant for my work? For me, in development work, in research, and in journalism, it has meant refusing the homogenizing, victimizing representation of women as a singular other. I borrow in my practice from critical, queer, post-colonial, and subaltern feminist scholars of color the notion of against the grain. It helps me place myself against the dominant positioning within the academic and the cultural world, where the homogenizing, victimizing approach of women as other is challenged to emphasize the alternative positions women could construct within those systems. Finally, what must it mean for us? I leave that for us to decide together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. We are going to pass now to Neha. So Neha and I know each other because she also worked together with Neha in the Water for Change project. And at that time, you were working in Delft, and you developed your PhD there. And I heard many times that you were like a tsunami every time you were joining justice-oriented discussions. And now we work together in trying to find funding together to collaborate, because we believe the importance of repair and healing as a process of also operating under technocratic projects. Either they are water projects or river projects like we are, or in other conditions. And I think I would very much love to hear from you how you have navigated the difficulties of treating topics like health, repair, and healing.
Thank you. I'm going to stand because I have it. I'm more comfortable. I hope I'm audible. Yes. Yep. Thank you so much for having me here. So today I'll be speaking about my work on repair as a transformative engagement. Just before that, to explain who I am, also generally, I am trained as an architect. I think most of us here are from that spatial background, right? And then I did my first master's in urban design. Luckily, I joined an organization called WRI, where I used to work as an engagement officer. My job for 6 years was just getting people on the same table. That's it. And when I used to discuss my work to my parents, my friends, they would just say, but it's just about getting people. But that's where all the politics lies. And this was not taught to me formally. And that's when, because of frustration of not getting recognized for these efforts, I came to Netherlands in 2017 and started my second master's in water governance at IHE Delft. And immediately after my second master's, I did my PhD at Delft. It's Dutch Research Institute for Transitions. It's in Erasmus, Rotterdam. So I have received many names, so I do not know what to call myself anymore. Sometimes I call myself as a knowledge broker. Sometimes I call myself as an action researcher, a decolonial scholar. I don't know where I stay also, because I always feel I should be working in India for some projects. And for me, I do want to explain my positionality here. It does help me to be a Dutch scholar working in different contexts, because the kind of scenarios, the political climate in my country and also the other countries, it gives me some kind of a safety net to practice what I really believe in justice. Or sometimes I'm also called as anti-national in my own space back at home. I hope it's a safe space. I can just discuss what I feel. And that's what I'll be sharing today. And also, even though I'm an architect and now I'm a social scientist who writes things, I do prefer visuals over text. So you'll see a lot of pictures in my presentation. I will be first explaining the kind of problems I work with, then the frameworks, which is of transition and transformation. So I basically work on enabling change, as simple as that. It has some very beautiful frameworks of transitions and transformations. And in my process, in my PhD processes, I challenge this Eurocentric ways of change. And I will try to show you how does that look like in everyday life. So first, to explain and trying to understand, I hope you all understand what a wicked problem looks like. I'm very simplistically explaining here. So they are ill-defined, ambiguous, contested, interrelated, multi-layered issues. In the scholarship of transition and transformation, they're also called as persistent problems. Now, imagine these problems in Global South. Again, I'm trying to simplify it. So how does Global South look like? Now, I'm talking here from a water governance background. It has intense episodes of weather, and interestingly, we also see that in global north now, exploding populations, poverty, making it more complex. We have a lot of social norms in place. There is dependency on primary sectors such as agriculture. The data and technology are difficult to procure and implement. One of the biggest issues in India is sharing of water data. It's not just creating data, it's also sharing. And informal governance in place, which is not even acknowledged. Now mix wicked problems with this context, and then I will give you an example. So I come from Mumbai, from a state of Maharashtra in India. What you see on the right-hand side are the sugarcane cutters. So sugarcane is a water-intensive crop. And when it grows, you have to produce it and sell it in a very quick span. So the women who are, unfortunately, the people, the owners, most of the times they hire women, because in India we believe that women have a supple body, so they can bend, they can cut. So it's known as a women's job. And to not miss out on days, they are supposed to undergo through a hysterectomy so that they do not miss out on 5 days of menstruation cycle. Now, the question here is, what kind of problem is this? Is this a gender problem? Is it a water problem? Is it an unemployment problem? And this is what wicked problems look like in the place where I come from. So when you're trying, I'm not trying to address this issue, but I'm trying to make you understand the gravity of wicked problems and how it looks like. So why are these problems very difficult to solve? A, monodiscipline doesn't work. In India, which was colonized by the Britishers, we have municipality systems, which has departments, and all those departments are headed by engineers. So we think engineering is a way to solve, and also urban planning. Nothing against these disciplines. It's the dominance of these disciplines. That's the problem. So monodiscipline approaches do not work. So imagine when you go to a doctor for certain issues, do you always go to one kind of doctor? No. There are also different kinds of doctors, right? So this is the problem of hegemony in our spaces. Then over-reliance on the technocratic or STEM practices. There are conflicting values, not discussing trade-offs, and also not acknowledging historic arms. So just moving ahead, bettering practices without acknowledging what went wrong before. And because of this, there are many approaches that were developed. So I'm not going to discuss these approaches per se. I'm just going to introduce you certain approaches. So on the left, you see transition management that talks about what are the processes that can support systemic change, that can challenge the core and can work towards a change. And there are many models such as, this is known as X-curve, not going to delve into this, but these kind of models provide a sort of a scaffolding of how do you think of change? Where do you think the solutions may emerge? Whom do you interact with? Who should be on the table? Generally, when we talk about governance, we speak about people coming and making decisions. But that decisions could also be about optimizing, about making things work. But making change happens also needs certain critical thinkers to challenge the very basic. And that is what happens in transition management. And a little bit more ahead is transformation that goes more radically thinking about the essential core values and what must be changed. There are a lot of papers that speak about how does transition and transformation differ. I'm not going that. For me, these are change frameworks. I think that's enough for now. But this is not enough. And this is something that became my thesis, my entry point towards this thesis. So first, change processes do not necessarily address pre-existing social inequities. I'll tell you from my example that might not be appreciated by many. So I am from coastal India. If you know Goa, I come from that region. So for me, eating fish is it's something very central to me. So when people here convert vegan for environmental reasons, I mean, all great and done. But then when the same ideologies move to India, it also kind of promotes casteism. So, and without understanding that these exportations of those kind of frameworks that can actually cause more harm, than what it intends to. And this is the reason why we need to understand the pre-existing social inequities before transferring of these well-intentioned northern frameworks. And that's where I'm coming from. So what did I do in my thesis? So in my thesis, I looked at how repair could be functioning as a mode of transformation. So when I talk about repair, I don't speak about going back to its original restoring or fixing things. I speak about repair as healing, making amends. I speak about nimbler innovations, about the slowness in change. To situate you better, I actually, one of the languages that we speak in India is Hindi. And also I can ask you to think about change or fixing or repair in your own language, and you will come up about, like, there are so many different words, and those nuances is what helped me understand repair better. So I'm not talking about fixing, going back to original. I'm talking about words like sudharna, rafu, collage, or, like in Japanese, there is this culture of repairing a broken cup using the golden liquid. So it's about moving ahead while acknowledging the past. And that is the kind of reparation I look at as a philosophy in the way I understand change. And here in this presentation today, I will be speaking about how these approaches of transition and transformation, again, well-intentioned maybe in these geographies, it unfortunately others in formality and relational models. Transition frameworks also speaks about how do we have experts as front runners. So when I speak about these frameworks, I speak about spaces. How do you call on people? What are the processes of change? And in that, these frameworks speak about what kind of expertise are required. Here, I am also challenging that it's not just experts, but also how do we bring in lived experiences? Then most of these frameworks and most of the scholarships talks about how do we get technocratic actors. And what I'm trying to work towards is how do we bring in other knowledge frames as well. And for me, this is what, for me, a feminist way of engagement spaces look like, because it centers power care, relationality, and epistemic plurality, so that the processes of change are just as the outcome as well. So I will be explaining from some of the exercises that I did. So this was a project in India, where there was this one workshop where we wanted stakeholders from a city to speak to experts. It sounds not a big deal, right? I can call people and I can ask people, hey, whatever problems you have, I'm going to invite some panelists and where you can ask questions. What happens is, to ask questions on change, first you need to accept that something is going wrong. And to accept something is going wrong can also be it can affect your health, it can lose your job because you have to call out. So that is the core of change, to acknowledge something has gone wrong. And when you do not acknowledge what has gone wrong, then there's no point calling expertise and speaking about what needs to be changed. And this is where we worked on designing something called as food fair. In India, we have workshops, we have labs, which are again being transported from the global north. And then these spaces become nothing but networking opportunities, where the real stuff doesn't get spoken. So this is where an idea of how do we speak around coffee machines, that's where real conversations happen. So we flipped this formal-looking space into something like, how do we have conversations around food? So we had different kiosks, which had snacks from India, different parts of India. We kept the experts on those tables, and we asked the stakeholders, just have food and have a chat. And nothing will be recorded, no questions asked. What we saw is, at the onset, people start asking, hey, what are the models you're working at? And slowly, the questions became on, how are you able to find money? How are you able to find permissions to make this work? So slowly, the questions went from technocratic to more governance, more behavioral questions. And that is what informal forms of engagement actually served as a catalyst. So here you see. Second, one of my experiences in Zambia is whom do you call as stakeholders to understand experiences? So when we talk of let's go and hear lived experiences, but then how do you facilitate? How do you go and how do you even understand? Especially when you do not speak that language. And sometimes if you know that language, then you speak from that one particular discipline. So for me, I actually conducted a drawing competition. I gave them very basic questions. How do you feel about the experience of fetching water? My research question was simple. It was about how men, women, and children think about access to water. So what you see here, the children started drawing how they fetch water under the fear of or feeling obedient. There are different norms that they are carrying ahead. Then how they carry water in spite of there being snakes, how they also face a lot of bodily issues. And when you speak, we also speak from a very constrained questionnaire that we miss out on all these kind of experiences. Because for them as well, sometimes people feel this is not that relevant or not that important to speak about because, it's whatever. That's not too scientific. That's experiences. And this is where such modes helps to understand. I am also a photojournalist, and while doing this, I was practicing visual ethnography, where I had to also carry my own water and walk with them. And while experiencing this, I also saw certain feelings, experiences that were never discussed in my semi-structured interviews, such as when women are carrying water, they have other labor, they have motherhood, they are also daughter-in-laws. When you say, hey, let's have this participatory approach and call everyone on board and have women also on that same table, but that same woman has multiple other jobs to do as well. And that labor has not been accounted for, and this is what is invisible. And our questions also further invisibilize. So how does photography help me understand these nuances, this unspoken labor that sometimes gets missed in our questionnaires? In one of the projects in India, I also designed games where you can have children also on board to understand their experiences in urban design, in designing neighborhood. What do they feel? So in that picture over there, we saw how a child is explaining where he feels safe or unsafe while cycling. Towards the end, also, how do you bring in other knowledge frames? Because speaking about other knowledge frames also makes you feel less scientific, less respected. So something that we did in one of the workshops is we actually did not address the hierarchies. We navigated. We asked senior stakeholders to go and explain from their experiences to junior stakeholders. The minute we did that, the senior stakeholders, when they speak about best case study, they start talking like, hey, you know what? This thing happened, and this is how we solved it. So the minute you say, how do you solve the problem, you first have to explain what was the problem. And that is when the problem was discussed, because earlier, none of the stakeholders would ever discuss the problem because it would look bad on them, because they would have to again call out the government and the municipality for not doing a job. So when you discuss a solution, you also have to discuss what was the problem that was solved in first place. And that's where the seniority, the experiences, they knew how to project that. So this is something that we did. And the design was like an unsupervised classroom. People could go and discuss wherever. So from these experiences, what changed was suddenly the people's experience came on board. And that is something that this spaces brought on forth. In one of the same projects, we had Mentimeter, where we asked stakeholders, what are your issues? From in earlier experiences, people used to talk about urban planning, financial resources, and slowly they started speaking about helplessness, corruption, these kind of issues. And these issues are never discussed. And come on, like those are municipality officers. When they don't feel motivated, of course the work is not going to happen. But no one speaks about these things. In workshops, all these processes resulted into in something like acknowledging and representing the in-between roles, such as mediators. In India, we have engineers doing everything. No one speaks about a behavioral scientist coming and helping mediate. And these are the roles that got acknowledged and asked for. So to summarize from all this, I'm not going to go in detail. So first thing what reparation has helped me is to center care over control, what Irene had discussed earlier. It has also helped me make the invisible labor visible. Second, as you saw, the kind of disciplines that got forth and then the kind of design, the governance challenges were addressed. It also challenged the epistemic, the knowledge frames. And it works with the history. It brought in the kind of issues that were never discussed before. And repair is not radical one-time change. It is iterative. It is 2 steps ahead, 1 step back, because you do not understand. It is happening in an ambiguous place. And repair transforms, it transforms the process of transformation. It's a new way of thinking of how repair looks like. So yeah, so repair is not soft. It is not something silly. It is not something, relational. It's not ascientific. It is actually very strong work which is done relationally. Thank you.
I think I need to be short in this one. But originally we had also Laura Kuhl joining us, but she's sick today. And I think I was really happy that I could join the 5th named, which I had in my list, but I could not add because we have always a number of people maximum we can get. But Caroline is stepping because she's that type of person. She's the type of person that you call her in the morning and then you are like, I need help. And she comes in with her whole force of feminist values, and she embodies that. So to me, I think I just give her the floor, nothing else.
Thank you, Irene. Well, it's very nice to be here and hear your stories. And what I want to start with is something that is not easy, I think. But if I want to talk about feminism or how my practice and what I do embraces feminist ideas, then I think it's a good way to start. And it's something maybe I think most of us do unexplicitly, but sometimes it's good to also be very, very explicit. And that is talking about your own positionality, because I will make 5 points, and the first one is that the personal is political. So I know that as a white European academic who's engaging with decolonial and intersectional debates, I need to recognize the privileges that my racial, national, and institutional position affords me. And I am also mindful that justice-oriented agendas must be led and informed by those mostly directly affected by structural injustices. And so, for myself, being a white, cisgender, Belgian-British woman, working at one of Europe's most prestigious technical universities, I have the privilege of having this institutional power as a backup. I have access to resources, and I carry the privileges that come with all of that. And we can ask ourselves now, why does it matter? Why does it matter to be explicit about this? Because it matters because I think, and I know that our field, spatial planning, urban design, architecture, it's very impactful. We design things, we draw things, and those designs shape other people's lives, other people's opportunities. And I think also that who designs and who shapes in different ways what is actually gets designed and being built, it has been very, very narrow. These realizations kind of became very apparent when I was in Cape Town for my PhD research. And I wanted to go to Cape Town because there was a group of women that really inspired me. They had a challenge, a housing challenge, and actually they set up a struggle and a fight to fight for housing for themselves and for their children. And so while that actually pulled me to go to Cape Town and try to understand this process, the whole PhD experiences working in a post-apartheid context really showed that it's important to be explicit about these things that often stay invisible, these unmarked positions of power, because they are really embedded not only in how we engage with each other, but they also become built in buildings, in spatial designs, in the structure of a city, like, for example, Cape Town. And that is actually what feminist practice means to me. It's not specific interests in women necessarily, nor empathy as a soft skill, but it's a rigorous, unsettling, analytical commitment to asking for whom is this space made and who was in the room when it was decided, because very simply said, urban space in general is not neutral. It is produced by specific decisions, by specific actors, and impacting specific subjects. So the problem is that space is systematically produced for and by a very specific subject. Very often the white, male, cis, highly educated, economically active person. And these things remain invisible if we don't talk about them, if we don't make it explicit. However, I have a few examples. There are some images from Flanders. It's the work of the PhD work of Els de Vos. And she looked at how housing was designed at a certain point and how the Farmers Association really played a role in kind of showing what is the what should be the norm house, how should people live, and it becomes clear that these kind of houses, they really represent in their design, in the plans, in which rooms are where. They really are designed for a heteronormative family with a man that goes out to work, that brings in the money, and the woman that is at home taking care of the children and cooking the meals. So in the design of the house, a lot of things are inscribed. Patriarchy is inscribed. But also in the design of sport facilities, in the design of parks, these are often designed from that single perspective. And I want to here point out a work by one of our former students, Olivia Jakowska. She looked at how space is gendered in Vienna, because Vienna is known for pioneering gender-sensitive urban planning. But she said, okay, all good and well, it was very pioneering, but how does it function today? And trying to show how, as was already mentioned before, how we really not should only look at gender, but at all the intersecting dimensions, class, race, age, disability, and so on. And that brings me to, again, also something that was already mentioned before, that intersectionality is key. I think that talking about feminist values in spatial practice comes with a risk. Because far too often I think people then move into a direction of, okay, what if we bring in women values? What if we bring in empathy, connection, care, all these things? And it's precisely that kind of talk that reproduces the gender binary I have been mentioning, and that we should actually dismantle. So for that, it's really important to use this kind of intersectional approach, because it brings us to the core of the question, which is a justice question, and I will come to that later. Again, kind of an illustration from an amazing work of a couple of years ago by Gosha, who looked at the impact of LGBTQ plus free zones in Poland, and trying to turn that kind of thinking around and actually try to understand how queering can produce more interesting, livable urban spaces. this idea of intersectionality has roots in the thinking of Patricia Hill Collins, Chandra Mohanty, and others. And I think it's this kind of, for example, Collins' matrix of domination. It shows also how these elements are spatial. Race, class, and gender are not separate layers, but they interact, they interlock, and we also build that into our system. So I think the important question that I try to bring to every project, every planning process in the studio, it's not about do we include women, what are the kind of feminine values to design with? No, not at all. The question really is, which bodies does the space serve that we design? And what does it exclude? Who is excluded? And what power relations are actually behind the fact or behind the design that we are producing? So how do I try to bring that into my teaching practice? And that I hope, students, sorry, I hope that it is teaching with hope. The traditional design studio very much embedded in these ideas of the Beaux-Arts, where you have the all-knowing, often male, like you can see in the corridor above, architect hero. That is kind of the things we need to try to dismantle. Not only this kind of hero teaching, but also how students need to perform in front of a jury, how crit panels are organized, and so on. And I take my inspiration a lot from the work of Mohanty and Hooks, and Bell Hooks, who sees education as an act of liberation, and Chandra Mohanty, who insists on solidarity and mutuality, but also on the work of Paulo Freire. And I really think it's important to do that structurally in our teaching, and it's what I would like to call a critical engaged studio. And those in the audience know that I'm very fond of Peter Marcus's framework of expose, propose, politicize, because it helps us to dig deeper, to not look at a design question as just a problem to be solved, but to really try to understand the deeper injustices that are happening. So I hope that in the projects that we do, we really ask these questions before we design, before we do a project, kind of what is the impact of the lines we draw? Who is impacted? Who is at the table? Who do we invite? Who do we make partner in the project? And I think if you look at, for example, the ASOP curriculum or the European Architectural Association on Education, you see that these questions of justice, they become more important and they find their way into a new curriculum. So I do think that there is change. It's slow and it can be stronger, but let's not lose hope, and kind of let's be radical, especially because we live in a moment when feminist values are under, I would say, a deliberate attack. It's not ignorance or whatever, it's a really deliberate attack. The rise of authoritarian, hyper-masculine politics, from Trump to Orbán to many, many others, with the result what we see today in the world. I want to really insist it's not incidental. It's really it's a very welcome way of kind of establishing authoritarian regimes and keeping the power within those regimes. And I want to end with a quote by Marlies Matos during the Sociological Association forum in Rabat. And she really says, like, democracy without gender equity is not complete democracy. It becomes ruled by the few, not by the many. And we really need to kind of be aware of that and know that women's rights rights of LGBTQ plus people and so on, it's important to stay aware of that. And it's not a niche, and it's not a nice kind of in our little group talk about these things. It's really urgent, and we need it for to enforce our democracy and democratic practices. So that's where I want to end. Thank you.
You can click next. Yes. So last but not least, it's Elise. And yeah, we have a relationship, mentor-student, but now we are of a friendship. That's what usually happens when you engage with the students in another approach. She's an architecture student, but she has a very interesting path that she will talk about today, because she's not a conventional student where she just do her bachelor and then master in architecture, and she believes in architecture. The first day we met, she told me, I want to quit architecture. And then I told her, don't do that. Let's work together in a graduation project and let's figure out what architecture should be. And I think she's going to tell us about that.
Yes, thank you, Irene. Actually, similar to what Caroline did is I would also like to start from a position that I'm very humble to be here, and I'm very honored you invited me. I also feel a little bit like an imposter because I feel like I'm still very much figuring out what feminist values mean to me, in what ways my practice is feminist, and I also am very aware that I'm a very privileged person in a large extent, and that's also part of this journey that I'll tell you about in a second. I think my journey, before I started this graduation project, I was already able to work around the system a lot of times, which made it easier in a way to approach this graduation project with a lot of freedom. And it also helped me to create a possibly quite unconventional graduation project in this architecture graduation. So I made this very artistic timeline yesterday night. Spent way too much time on it, but I just tried to represent how my life went. And the first moment where I steered away from the conventional path was actually because my mother decided to do a PhD at 40-something, and no one offered her to do an exchange, which is quite common in PhDs, but they were like, oh, you're a mother, you have a family, we can't offer you this PhD, like you're not going to do it. And she was like, no, but I want to go. And she took all of us to go to Australia. I think it's the first moment where I'm privileged to have a mother who does this kind of things and is able to do these kind of things. And it's also taught me that if you want to do something, you can actually go after it and try to achieve it. So I spent a half year in an Australian education system, and then I got back and I had to catch up, and everybody told me I couldn't do it. But I just studied and I managed to pass, and I passed my high school. And then in 2018, I started here with the bachelor bouwkunde. I was very excited to start because I was really eager to make a physical impact on sustainability. I became a vegetarian at 10. I was very passionate about the sustainability crisis, and I realized I was also excited to do math, actually, at the TU Delft. Figured that was not happening after a year. I decided to find my own math courses, and I did 2 calculus courses at TPM, and I think this is also me trying to figure out my own way within the system. I ended my bachelor with an internship, and this is when I was really confronted with the fact that the architectural practice wasn't really offering me what I was hoping it would, and that it was really hard to make the impact that I was aiming to make. It was actually a very nice firm, and I got to do a lot of things, but I realized that if this is what I'd be doing every day, then I hope I quit and find something else where I feel like I can have more meaningful impact. And then I realized that maybe then I should find a different path. So I studied AI for a year. It's like, try something else. That wasn't it, but I did realize that I was very interested in psychology, and I also missed the built environment. So I went back, I started my master's in architecture, and at the same time I started a master's in human technology interaction. Again, here I had a huge privilege of being able to do 2 masters at the same time, being able to extend my master's for 3 years instead of 3.5 years instead of the normal 2 years, because I have support from my family and I had the safety net that I had the time to do this. And part of this master's in human technology interaction was that I had to go on an exchange. And I was really excited about that because my bachelor exchange was canceled because of COVID. And I went to do an exchange at the Royal Danish Academy, where I did an exchange in the political architecture critical sustainability program. And I think this is a very pivotal moment for me. It really shaped my graduation project because this is the first time that I encountered that we can incorporate critical thinking within our architectural practice. I realized that architecture can be political. Actually, I realized that architecture always is political, but I just never really realized this. And I also realized that it can do a lot more for sustainability and this more than human life. So where originally I intended to do Explore Lab here in my graduation project, where you can shape your own project, to combine my human technology interaction background with my architecture, I threw that out of the window. I finished my human technology course, my thesis, and I decided to focus my graduation project here on these theories that I had encountered at my exchange. At this point, I had not really thought about feminist values at all, ever. I think there was some feminist values in the critical theory, and it was a term that I came across, but I wasn't aware of what it meant and what it would do to my project. And so when I talked to Irene, I was like, yeah, I'm doing this project because I just want to see if I can do something with architecture, with the things that I want to do, but I'm a little bit skeptical, and if I don't like it, I'll just quit because I already have a master's and it's fine. I'll just see what I can do. And I think the first time I talked to Irene, I was really immensely inspired, and one of the most valuable things she helped me with was this lovely mind map that I started my project with, because I was trying to figure out how to focus my fascination into a project, and the coordinators of the course told me, okay, maybe you should like narrow it down a little, like pick one of these things because you're going everywhere. You're going from learning from nature and ecosystems to psychology and colonialism and capitalism and degrowth, and maybe this is just a little bit too much. And Irene just told me, no, maybe we just need to find a term that encompasses all of this. And that's when I encountered ecofeminism, which is what became the central and the focal point of my graduation project. So the graduation project I did was on reimagining architecture through an ecofeminist lens. And for a long time, this ecofeminist lens for me was just this umbrella term so that I could explore both colonial theory as well as anti-capitalist theory and post-humanist theory. And I did not necessarily relate to the feminist sense part of this word because I was not aware that the fact that it wasn't about gender could still make it feminist. And it took me a long time, and I think I'm still figuring out, as I said, what that means. But if I hear Irene talk about all the things that are feminist design, and if I hear all of your practices that are clearly very feminist, I realized that maybe my project had a little bit more feminism than I sometimes give it credit for. And I've also realized that maybe feminism, to me at least, is about this engagement with injustice. It's about challenging these dominant systems and about a way of practicing differently, and maybe doing these things is already beyond enough to call your practice feminist. To make it a little bit more interesting maybe for anyone here, I would like to just highlight 3 ways in which I now can acknowledge that I clearly practiced feminism in my graduation project. And the first one is, I think, very clear, and to me was always very clear and feminist because it was the first piece of feminist literature that Irene passed to me, like after a week of talking, I think. And it was about positionality. And that's this idea, this understanding that who you are and what you do and know as a practitioner and as a researcher shapes inevitably your project. So I made this positionality journal, and throughout my whole process, I've always reflected and positioned myself, who I am and how that affected the choices I made. The second thing that I did was that my research methodology, this was my research methodology, it was very nonlinear. It consistently talked about reflection, and my positionality was also an active part in my research methodology. It was this lens that I used to take information from my framework and turn it into values that I could use in my process. I used a process of radical spatial imagination, which I'd love to tell you more about it. You can also ask Irene about it. But it's basically this practice of research by design that's rooted in questions of spatial justice, and to me also very much in this notion of plurality, this idea that there's multiple ways of knowing and being in this world. And this engagement with my positionality also in this process was very freeing, because instead of forcing me to do the perfect thing and to know the perfect answer, this project was always about exploring a what if and being very open about my own limitations and my own position in that, and being open about it also made that I didn't have to be perfect, because someone could read my positionality journal and could critically reflect on the project, and that was the point. The whole point has always been that it's open for people to engage with and to critically reflect on, and I'm not going to ever claim that it's perfect, because I don't think it is, and I'm still learning and growing with it. And that's also what comes with the results, which were my insights, and the results of my research were no conclusions, because they're not definite, they're not the final thing, they're just things that I realized throughout this process. Picture on the left shows my research boards, which were places where I just like put all of my information and tried to find these connections so that eventually I could find this collection of insights. Yeah, I have a book with me with these 18 insights, and I think it includes empty pages at the end, because again, this is a space where I'd like people to invite people to engage in this research with me. So I also, at my graduation project, I shared it with everyone. I gave everybody a booklet, and I hoped that everybody felt that they could partake in the research that I was doing. Then lastly, we had my presentation, and in my final presentation, I did not use any of the traditional methods of presentation. I had no floor plans. I don't think I've drawn a single facade at any point in my architectural project. Don't tell anyone. And my presentation was done with this. I mean, this is almost a section, so I guess that's kind of a conventional method. I drew them on 1.5 by 1 meter pieces of sketch paper by hand. And the project is not a solution or an answer to a question, but it's a manifestation of this eco-feminist lens that I explored. And it's more of a provocation. So my presentation was centered around storytelling, around taking people along with me into the station and trying to invite them to imagine the station with me and then to reflect on it and to think about, hey, what does this eco-feminist lens do, and why are there certain structures of power, and all of the things we talked about before. There is a lot of feminist values in my design as well. There's reciprocity, relationality, and there's this huge critique on the structural systems. But I think this is what I wanted to focus my presentation on for today. The last thing I'd like to do is I would like to make clear that this was not an individual project, even though these architectural graduation projects are presented as one. Yesterday, we had a really nice session, and someone talked about the myth of the solitary genius in architectural practice. And this project never felt like it was only mine. Not only feeling with Irene always felt like we were working together, and the same for my other tutors, Susanna and Rufus, but there have also been so many people throughout this project that I could brainstorm with, that helped me design, that helped me think about my storyline, that helped me think about all these things, that helped me set up the presentation over here, that just talked to me about my mental health. And I think that also is feminist. It's this idea that we're not doing it by ourselves, but we're in this community, and any project we make, we do together.
I think we have some time for some questions and debates or discussions. I think we can keep the next slide. Yes, I think we keep this one in the background. I don't see very well with this light on my eyes, but I hope someone is around there to help me to find questions. Is there someone with a question? Yes, Jasmina.
Is it? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for all of your presentations. I've taken a full page of notes for everything that you sort of said. And I feel like I resonate. I think we spoke about this yesterday, Elisa, that we resonate a lot with each other's work. And I feel like if in 2021 I had you as a mentor or a teacher, I would have had a much more chill time in actually graduating. But I think there's something that struck a chord with me about what Caroline was saying. That when we start saying that empathy and being good with working with people, these sort of things, when we start to link them to us as a sort of like value or soft skill that we have, is not the best way to go about it, because then it reinforces this this thing that, you know, this gendering in a way. And I got really called out because I have this in my CV, and this is how I also present myself when I engage with other people, because I find these things to be very important. But I also do not know how to explain the value of these and not make it so tokenistic indeed. Or, so I don't know if you can sort of expand a bit on that, on how not to make it so superficial in a way, but yeah.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I know that I put it a bit out there, maybe a bit blunt, but I think it's something we really need to discuss, because I feel also like with a lot of attention on cities designed for women, by women, and I think of course it's important to think about questions of safety and care and all these things, but I think to just limit it as something that is the responsibility of women and women designers, or kind of we need to bring in women designers to cover this, I think it's problematic for many reasons. Also, kind of for others, it's easy. We step back and we invite the women, and you come and help us and explain us how we need to do it, and then we will do safe. I think it's a responsibility for everyone to really think of how do you create spaces and cities that are welcoming and good for everyone, where everybody can flourish, where everyone can have a good life. And and so it's everyone's responsibility, not just that of women, but also of our other colleagues, designers. That's one point. Doesn't mean that we don't need to talk about it, and we don't need to put these values on the table. I do think they are important, and I do think in education, for example, it's also just crucial that more and more teachers become aware of how can you take this into your teaching, not only in kind of content, how do you design safe spaces or welcoming spaces that are also accommodating girls, but also in our teaching practice and how we just talk and work with each other. It's if you can bring that in education, then you can bring that into the practices, and maybe in practices people can start to be more supportive. And if we're more supportive to each other, it will also kind of resonate in, or we'll bring that in our designs as well. Maybe I'm naive, but that is what I think. It's just too easy to just put it on again on a woman's plate who's already doing all these other extra care and points. I don't know. I hope it's kind of answered your question.
Is there some other questions around? Because I have a few, but I haven't spoken too much.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for all of you, but specifically with regards to the topic of imperial feminism. So within sort of the sustainability circles, there's this idea of greenwashing, right? Where you're sort of applying sustainable practices, but not really. And I think your talk about imperial feminism reminded me of that in a way. And I was wondering if you sort of have any examples or ways where feminism is used as a weapon and not a solution, aside from, of course, supporting the imperial agenda. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for your question. You just like greenwashing is the usage of sustainability for let's say like maybe furthering capitalist frontiers. We also have pink washing, which is kind of the usage of gender and queer identities for legitimizing what is imperial plunder. To me, I think pinkwashing is, I think like our entire world order is rampant with pinkwashing, be it, for example, when we talk about like gender quotas in parliaments of countries that are carrying out genocides, or when we show up to something as small as a university panel where you have a 50% women or women presenting panelists, but the institution in itself remains a front for colonial capitalist intentions and propagates the same power and kind of replicates the same power structures while just including women and queer people as tokens. So I don't think I can give you one example. I think we can look around ourselves. Past 2 years have been replete with instances of pinkwashing. And I think one way for me to, I think Irene and I have also talked about this, is to becoming feminist is realizing that things like, for example, care and empathy are feminist, not because I want to decouple them from like their gendered notion. They're feminist because they also target the root of something, but at the same time, being a militant or being a resistance fighter or solidarity or all these powerful anti-power things are also feminist because they also target the root of, like power, injustice. So yeah, that's a little bit from me.
Yeah. Is there someone who wants to reply to that from the panel? Because it was a collective question, right? Otherwise, we move on. Questions? If you make me go up, someone else will help.
Hi, thank you all. Very nice talks you gave, and very personal stories and introductions. Very nice to hear. I have something that is not maybe necessarily a question, but when talking about space neutrality, Caroline Newton, I think mainly that was in your talk, but I also want to give this as a collective general wondering. I do think that here in architecture studies, we often think of space and time, not to forget, as a cartographic kind of empty box where we can place things. And I don't know, lately I'm thinking of time-space as rather relations and, so the operative and help me here, Dory. Yes, so perhaps I think that there is something very to the core of how we learn architecture or space or design, that needs to be questioned. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
I agree. I agree very much. But I think in certain parts of the building and in this is very obvious. But you also mentioned it. Architecture and design is political. It's so. I think if it's denied, or if people say space kind of is neutral and design is neutral, I think it's fundamentally wrong in a lot of ways, because it also makes that it gives you the opportunity to step back from your responsibility. It's like, we have. There's a client and he asks this and this and this, so we are the architects, we have to comply. No, you don't have to comply. You can question this. I'm not saying that it's easy, and I know that sometimes, you have to make a living, and I do understand that. But I think teaching architecture and design as neutral things, it gives people the opportunity to kind of step back from the responsibility that I think we have. And this responsibility, as architects, as designers, it's there, but everyone, I think, has a responsibility in taking care of the place that we are inhabiting together in a good way. So on many different levels, I think it's important to start to teach and acknowledge that design space is not neutral. Yeah.
I think this connects a lot to what I say, like, are we teaching critical, or are we learning critical thinking, or are we learning skills? Where? Ah, yeah, sorry, Annika.
I would like to ask Neha, because you were also working with water governance and working in a place where there is a lot of hierarchy in design. Because my thesis is in Bangladesh and I'm also working with the river, and it's very hard to find data on the water, but also to understand how decisions were made in the governance system. So, and also the cultural practices that are going around the river body. And after like many discussions with many of my mentors, I've realized that sometimes the practices that I think are normal are not normal. And how do you kind of separate yourself from that viewpoint and look at it just as a designer and not as a person who's also from that background? Is like a question I would like to ask because I'm struggling with it. So if you had any suggestions or ideas.
That's a very difficult question, but I'll try to answer this. So one thing I have never done is I've never separated. I acknowledge who I am in that space. And that has also helped me understand the kind of boundaries that are set and kind of boundaries that I blurred, because I was also intentionally there doing certain things. So when I used to facilitate these spaces, I also had an opinion. I also hated certain people. Of course, I mean, I have my own value system, but then when I'm kind of facilitating different people, I also have to enable a safe space, right? But then I used to go back and rant to my colleagues and say, like, this is shit. Like, Jonathan was my colleague, and then how many times we had gone out for smoke breaks. But you cannot. But for me, one of the most political way of doing is reclaiming and saying this is what it is and this is what I am. So in my Indian PhD project, even though I was an Indian working in India, but India for me is a continent. So I come from a primary city, Bombay, working in a secondary city of Bhopal and Bhuj. And then the way I used to speak Hindi was different from the way that they used to speak Hindi. And then they used to look at me as a known foreigner, like someone we can speak to, but then she is also someone who is not going to create that much of a problem. So when people would speak to me about corruption and corruption practices, like she understands. But she is not that someone like she's going to report us to the superiors. So those things I did identify like where I am and what I'm doing. And similarly in my African field work, so one of the main results that came in was how dowry affected access to water. And in Asia, like the women pays dowry to the man's family, though it's criminalized and everything, but that's the practice. And in Africa, it's opposite. So the thing is, they did not feel ashamed of discussing about dowry. They actually felt sorry that I will have to give dowry. Like, why don't you marry one of us? And then you'll get some kind of exchange or something. So it was easy. So then there I was a known foreigner. So again, I accepted who I am in this space, and that helped me to also understand the currency and the agency I carry. And then that helped me sometimes navigate as well. And the other part, the earlier part of your question, I actually want to answer with an example. So many times we also carry, like from the things that we study, the things that we see, the things that we hear from each other, we also sometimes think, hey, this is what is unsustainable and this is what is sustainable and this is what I'm going to work towards. So in one of my experience in water governance, in India, there are these projects of putting bore wells, like an area where you can pump groundwater for women in villages to get access to water. This was supposed to be something that would help women who would otherwise walk, kilometers and miles to fetch water. And it seems very correct, right? And then it saves time, then women can do so many other productive works and so on and so forth. And it was seen as the greatest solution and one of the most engineering marvels, and that's what the money was spent. But my question here is, did anyone ask the woman to be saved? And was that the current practice is unsustainable? I'm not even advocating that people should go and walk miles to fetch water. But then assuming that was a problem and therefore this has to be the solution, that is something that needs to be questioned. Because when asked to this woman, like how, when you do this evaluation of the programs, they were asked, so how does it feel now that you have water right at your doorstep? They said it's not great because it took away the time, our leisure time to speak to our friends. And now we have to do unnecessary extra household work because the mother-in-law is asking us to do. And they did not enjoy it. They actually enjoyed walking some time away from their families to be with their female friends. And leisure is not considered as important, and we make everything very productive. And that is a solution, and that is seen as sustainable. So these are the things I would say, begin with what is unsustainability to that person in that space and that time, and to be open to even receive, hey, oh, okay, this is something interesting. Maybe the solution shouldn't have been a water pump or could be somewhere else. I don't know. I'm not even questioning the solution, but I'm questioning the process of how assumptions are. And that's where I feel through this process, it has also made me feel open to answering and listening to everything and anything, and then thinking back and then hoping to create a safe space. And that's why in my research, I also say safe enough and not safe space, because it's never an absolute term. Yeah.
We are over time. This was short, but I hope helpful. The idea of every Feminist Week is to bring together people to talk about feminism, to talk about values, to start engaging with it, and also reflect how it impacts in our everyday practice in this faculty, but also beyond. And I hope you join us next year again, and we will find what format and what ideas are. So please fill the form if you want to contribute or be part of it or just give an idea. For the rest, I hope you have a very good night.